Now, the first direct talks between Russian and Ukrainian delegations in more than 3 years have been taking place in Turkey's biggest city, Istanbul. It's not yet clear if there's been much progress. Expectations were low, including for a ceasefire. US and Turkish representatives have also been taking part in the first negotiations between Kyiv and Moscow since the Russian invasion of Ukraine in 2022. The American Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, was in Istanbul, although another official represented the US at the talks. Mr. Rubio said significant progress was unlikely before a meeting between President Trump and the Russian leader Vladimir Putin. President Putin has stayed away, sending a relatively low-level delegation. President Trump has not criticized Mr. Putin for not attending, saying he understood the decision.
You know, they all said Putin was going and Zelenskyy was going, and I said, if I don't go, I guarantee Putin's not going. And he didn't go, and I understand that, but we're going to get it. We're going to get it done. We got to get it done. 5,000 young people are being killed every single week on average, and we're going to get it done.
But we came because we were told that there might be a direct engagement between the Russians and the Ukrainians. That was originally the plan. You all heard the same thing. That was not to be the case, or if it is, it's not at the levels we had hoped it would be at. I hope I'm wrong. I hope they have tremendous breakthrough tomorrow if they talk. But I frankly do not believe that we're going to have a breakthrough here until President Trump sits face-to-face with President Putin and determines what his intentions are moving forward. Our goal here is to achieve peace. Whether that begins with a 30-day ceasefire or a one-day ceasefire or a final deal that's all negotiated in one day, the process to us is less important than the outcome. And the outcome needs to be not just a peace, but a sustainable peace, a durable peace. That's our goal. That's what we're going to try to continue to achieve in any way we can. This is a group that deliberately on October 7th committed horrifying crimes, which has triggered this conflict. That said, we're not immune or in any way insensitive to the suffering of the people of Gaza, and I know that there's opportunities here to provide aid for them. There's a plan out there that's been offered, that's been criticized by some, but it allows people to get aid without Hamas stealing it. And we'll continue to work towards that in ways that we think are constructive and productive. The people that were removed from this country were dangerous criminals. These were not migrants, these were criminals. Okay, there's migrants or people that come here, they violate the law because they broke our immigration laws. Those people.
This week we had a real chance to take important steps toward ending this war. If only Putin had not been afraid to come to Turkey. I was in Ankara yesterday, and thanks for participation and hosting us, President Erdogan. And I was ready for a direct meeting with Putin, whether in Ankara or in Istanbul, and not just for a meeting, but to resolve all the important issues, to my mind.
President Zelenskyy. Well, for more on this, let's speak now to the international affairs analyst, Dr. Marek Laskiewicz, who joins me on the line from London. Thank you very much indeed for joining us, Dr. Laskiewicz. So after a day of waiting, things appear to be on the move. Do you know what's come out of that meeting?
The only thing that's come out of it are, one, that the meeting took place at all, and two, they've agreed on an exchange of prisoners of war, which is a small step. It just simply shows that some degree of working together is possible. There was also an exchange of views about what each side wanted, which is nothing new about that. That's been ongoing now for months, if not years, and there was no movement on that at all, therefore no breakthrough at all.
Given that it's so little after so long, we're going to try and break those into bite-sized chunks, knowing that you will do us the favor and the honor of analyzing them as you always have. They've agreed to exchange 1,000 prisoners of war each, and I understand that's the biggest such swap since the start of the conflict.
Yes, it is. From that point of view, it is a move. It shows that some degree of working together is possible. I think also both sides want to demonstrate their willingness before President Donald Trump. So from that point of view, it was the least they could do, which actually does not touch the essentials of the breakthrough at all, but it is at least something. Yes.
And I understand the Ukrainians were pushing for a ceasefire to start immediately. That didn't happen, so they agreed to present their visions of a ceasefire. Does that suggest that possibly another round of direct talks will be held?
Yes. I imagine there will be more direct talks. However, there is no likelihood at all at present of a ceasefire because Russia doesn't want it. And America has accepted this because it's stated there on your clip that there could be a ceasefire, a 1 day, 30 day, or none at all. That was not important for the States. And if it's not wanted by Russia and unimportant to America, no ceasefire will take place despite Ukraine and Europe demanding it.
And we also understand that the participants also discussed a possible meeting between Presidents Zelenskyy and Putin, and the Russians are only saying they noted that request. So clearly an issue on which no progress has been made.
Absolutely none. As far as I can tell, President Putin does not want to meet President Zelenskyy at all. There is no possibility whatsoever of such a talk making a breakthrough in President Zelensky's viewpoint, because quite simply, Russia doesn't operate like that. It takes negotiations very seriously. They're very meticulous in their approach of negotiations. They're nitpicking, or if you prefer, have a huge attention to detail and never rush. So the notion that suddenly President Zelenskyy and President Putin get together and sort the whole thing out in half an hour in time for a cup of tea is just sheer nonsense. In fact, there is no real point in such a meeting because until some sort of agreement is reached by albeit low-level delegations, there's none chance whatsoever of it occurring at a high level. Russia simply does not function along those lines.
But presumably direct talks, such as we've seen them having, implies that the Russian and Ukrainian delegations were in the same room for these talks.
Yes, that's very important from 3 points of view. One, there is no attenuation. There's no middleman to garble things. Number two, it is a direct meeting, and that per se is very important because there has been one for years. And three, it does show, one very important point, that Russia does accept that this delegation, which ultimately comes from President Zelenskyy, it does show they're prepared to accept that President Zelenskyy is in charge of Ukraine. And up till now, they've been insisting that President Zelenskyy is actually not the correct leader, de jure, of Ukraine, the correct president. So from this point of view, the very act of meeting is important, even if relatively little progress has been made.
And from the Ukrainian side, I mean, being around that table with Russian government representatives for whom they must feel something of an intense hatred as representatives of the invading power.
Yes, that is quite correct. No doubt they do dislike them intensely, in some cases possibly to the point of hatred. The question is whether they can, in all this talking, actually get anywhere with the Russians. And it is very, very hard to see any possibility of a breakthrough until, as President Donald Trump says, he meets with President Putin.
And I mean, who exactly, Dr. Laskiewicz, did get together in the end? Because we know there was no Putin and President Zelenskyy went home, didn't he?
That is correct. They're not even, well, the Russian delegation, which is in this case the important one to underline, did not even have a minister. It just is low-level deputies and aides. However, that is not as important as is made out, although I think it's a mistake of the Russians not to have sent a minister. The point about it is that they did come and it did listen to the Ukrainians and present it. That is all. But no low-level delegation, even had it been led by a minister, would have made a breakthrough or a decision. Russia doesn't function that way. Sooner or later, they go back to Moscow to report, and then it comes whatever next stage there is. But there will be no breakthrough at such a meeting because Russia itself does not function. They have to examine each proposal carefully, and only then will something emerge.
So low-key talks, US Secretary of State Marco Rubio, who was in Istanbul but didn't attend the meeting, said he didn't expect the talks to result in much. And he said that even before the meeting started. And that rather degraded things, didn't it?
I think he did that just to take out any expectations, because the Ukrainians and Europeans keep making these demands, and the point about them is they're quite unrealistic as things stand. And Marco Rubio quite correctly simply deflated these expectations and pointed out there was a meeting. So from that point of view, his was by far the most realistic analysis. The fact he didn't attend is quite simple. If there's no Russian in the delegation at his level in government, it would have been a mistake for him to attend.
And I mean, you had mentioned at the outset, Dr. Laskiewicz, that the Ukrainians had wanted the talks to focus on a ceasefire and then subsequently everything else. I mean, as you said, that obviously didn't happen. But what about the Russians? They wanted to address more fundamental issues, such as what they called the root causes of the crisis.
Yes, I think that actually is a euphemism for saying that they want things resolved their way. And what they mean by that is that no territory in Ukraine inhabited by Russians should carry on being ruled by Ukraine. And in other words, it really is a polite way of saying they want all 4 provinces. And apparently during the meeting, one of the Russians said next time they meet, in other words, were these talks to break down, they would want 5 provinces. The point is that they're simply saying they want that land. They want to keep it, and the root cause was that there were Russians being ruled by Ukrainians, which for Russia was unacceptable.
And of course, these negotiations have not had any practical impact on the fighting on the ground in Ukraine, has it?
Absolutely none. President Putin is pressing ahead. I would really dearly love to capture something like Pokrovsk, but whether he'll be able to do so is another matter. The level of losses to which President Donald Trump alluded to, from the Russian point of view, is not a lot. They're not actually as concerned. Whether these levels of losses are in fact true or not is another question. It's very hard to actually establish. And therefore, what President Putin would like was to capture more territory. Please note, the 4 regions he wants, on top of Crimea, of course, are not fully in Russian hands. And therefore, he would like to actually put them into Russian hands.
And beyond what is happening sort of immediately with these talks, I mean, looking at it from your privileged perch as someone who has followed developments in that part of the world over many years and has in fact written books about it, I mean, are these things that are happening meeting your predictions or going against the grain of your predictions?
My prediction would have been that Russia comes out of it in some ways as a victor, and it appears to be doing so because the Americans are implying that they're prepared to accept some of the territory captured to remain in Russian hands. And as a result, the effect will be to spur Russia on, to embolden her to make more demands, and Baltic states and Poland, in particular Poland and the Suwalki passage, being the most important. And therefore, from that point of view, we are on target, albeit, thank goodness, the West did support Ukraine militarily to the extent the Russian has been halted, not a steamroller crushing Ukraine in one go, but rather a slow snail's progress. And therefore, yes, it is going in the wrong direction because Russia is winning, but no, not as quickly as I envisaged. Moreover, there is a possibility, it's very slim, but it does exist, that perhaps the President Donald Trump will be able to bring this to an end with a truce. Although at present, there appears to be no possibility at all on the basis of the demands by Russia and Ukraine.
On that note, I want to thank you, as always. Dr. Marek Laskiewicz is the International Affairs analyst and multifaceted author, I might add, and he was talking to me on the line there from London.